Hello, so this one's a little bit spontaneous, but I think it's an important subject. I've sort of touched on it before, but going to bring it up again. So this past week, there was big news about the successful lunar landing by India, and this is actually I'm going to show you the cover of the UK Metro newspaper. This is our most popular free newspaper, and it's dated the 24th of August. Get closer there. So you see that headline, India over the moon. The other papers that day were leading on the Prigozhin story, the plane crash in Russia. But the Metro decided to lead on the successful lunar mission. India has become the first country to successfully land a probe on the south pole of the moon. So it's big scientific development, and it's a big story in terms of lunar exploration. And I'll show you once again, nations lunar landing. India over the moon, okay? The reports by Catherine Fiddler. But clearly it's a very positive angle, right? So here's a British newspaper giving a positive angle to this story. And the other coverage I've seen has been overwhelmingly positive. That's the reality. Now on GB News, Patrick Christys, who's one of their presenters, raised the question about whether this then poses the issue of whether India should return aid money. The logic being that if a country can have its own successful space program, should it really be getting foreign aid? Well, that was his opinion, okay? But that hasn't stopped a hysterical barrage of nationalistic responses. An example being Palki Sharma, who in my opinion is an anti-British bigot because she's constantly promoting an anti-British narrative on WION News. Gravitas is a specific program talking about colonial mindsets and British racism and all the rest of it. And it's not the only one. There's other Indian networks that are doing this. So they've really picked up on this story. So one presenter on one news program has raised this question. I wouldn't like to see Mr. Christie's social media accounts at the moment. I imagine he'll be bombarded with Indian nationalists. But there's a few things to digest here with this. Firstly, the question itself that he raised, is it a valid question? I would say actually it is. Now, the Indian nationalist response is, well, the British colonised India, exploited India for hundreds of years, so what right have they to complain about giving money back? Right, so it's kind of whataboutery, but the fact of the matter is India's been independent for 76 years. And India is now the world's fifth biggest economy. It surpassed the UK, I believe, as of a couple of years ago. The UK would be sixth or seventh. It's sort of tied between India, Britain, and France, all roughly the same. But I think India's just surpassed the UK. I think the issue of foreign aid is a complex subject. It's not as straight cut as it goes to a country, then that goes to the space program. So maybe Christys was wrong to make it black and white, but I think it's a valid question. I don't think it's a racist question, as has pathetically been presented, and I defend his right as a journalist, as a presenter, to raise the question. It's a valid point of debate. India is a wealthy, powerful country, wealthy in terms of size of GDP, not per capita. But what I really have a problem with here is the false narrative, this idea that, oh, look, one presenter represents the whole UK, and it's the British are bitter because of India's success. It's this Lemonos mindset, and I'm sick and tired of Indian nationalists doing this. I'm talking about the likes of Palki Sharma and others. I think they itch for a chance to have a go at the old colonial power. Every opportunity, it's the British this, the British that. I'm sick of it. Okay, why is it okay for Indians to be patriotic and nationalistic, but as soon as the British raise questions about our national priorities or our national interest, then it's racism? I'm sick of the double standards. Could it be maybe because some of the British media has covered some of the less glamorous things that go on in India? For example, some of the ethnic violence that happens there, some of the religious violence. Now, India is often said as the world's biggest democracy, and I think there is still a lot of ground for debate in India. India is not China, okay? I recognise that. And to be fair, some of the biggest critics of things that go on in India, some of those problems in India, are Indians themselves. So I'm not one to say that every Indian is blinded by nationalism. I don't think that's the case. But I do think it is glaringly obvious that since Modi came to power, India has become a more intolerant country. Um, I think it's glaringly obvious that there is a sort of intolerant Hindutva nationalism. And then this space program is, all Indians should be proud of it. And by the way, I have no problem with Indians being proud of that. What I have a problem with, though, is this hypersensitive nationalism. It's pathetic, and it's really closed-minded. Um, because what they're doing is they're taking one presenter. I'm talking about people like Palki Sharma. They're taking one presenter in Patrick Christys who's raised a question. Whether you agree with the question or not is a different matter. But then saying this is the British. So there's actually a very racist attitude towards the British people, which includes myself. So I take issue with that. Um, I'm sick and tired of this anti-British narrative coming from Indian media. They complain that there's an anti-Indian narrative when issues like the religious violence is covered. But I would say there's an anti-British narrative from Indian media. And, it's a sad thing because our countries do have historic ties for obvious reasons. But there's many Indians in the UK, and Indians make a very big contribution to this country. I'm not anti-India. Um, but I am patriotic enough to push back a little bit and say, wait a second, why are you allowed to be nationalistic and, triumph the glory of India, but as soon as we ask questions about our national interest, then it's somehow racism. The double standards are ridiculous. Um, but I do think there's a rather ugly nationalistic environment that has developed in India. I've just seen a report, incidentally, about a teacher in Uttar Pradesh who got her other students, and this has went viral in India itself, so that's a good thing. It's not like China where this sort of stuff is censored. Um, and she got other students to slap a Muslim boy, and she claimed that her whole village supported it. Now, this has attracted a lot of controversy. Um, Criminal proceedings are underway. She's made a grovelling apology, but only after defending her actions. And, a lot of Indians will condemn that. That's good. Credit where credit's due. But the point I'm making here is this is not unique. This sort of thing is rising under Modi's India. Um, it's a reality. So forgive me if I'm not jumping with joy that India's got a successful lunar probe. Why the hell should British people be expected to be jubilant? I think balanced coverage is enough. Say, congratulations, India. It's a good scientific achievement. Well done. But why should we go beyond that? And this idea that if there's any sort of criticism, then it's jealousy and it represents the whole country. It's bullshit. Um, So I think Patrick Christie says, I defend his freedom of speech. I think he's every right to ask that question as a journalist and as a presenter. And I think hate mongers like Palki Sharma, who is constantly pushing an anti-British narrative on her network, um, if for example Mr. Christie's safety was threatened, she would be to blame, along with other nationalist demagogues. But the question he raised is a valid one. Whether you agree with it or not, it's a valid question. Britain's a democracy and we have a right to debate these things. Um, I would say that India continues to have a lot of poverty. So if British aid money goes to helping vulnerable people, poor people, I don't have a problem with that. But I think the question that he raised, why continue to send so much money to a country with its own space program, and bringing up the wrongs of empire. The point I make about that is India's been independent for 76 years. So this notion that Anglo-Indian relations should always be defined through the prism of imperial guilt, like any sort of critique or any difference of opinion. Oh, well, just bring up the empire. I'm sick of it, actually. Um, because most of the Indians who are doing that weren't even born at the time of the Raj. So it's like this ancestral animosity. Um, I want the UK and India to have good relations, but I think that there is a problem in this constant sort of guilt mongering towards this country, and this constant, how can it be a level playing field? How can it be mutual respect if it's a constant case of this hypersensitive nationalism, um, and this hysterical reaction? And it's a distortion because most of the coverage in this country has been positive. This headline proves it. So, Palki Sharma, what's your answer to me? You're distorting the reality. I've seen another example where WION News used footage of British football hooligans rioting somewhere in Europe, and it's like, oh, this is how these people behave. I think there is an Anglophobia in some in Indian networks, and there's no justification for it in 2023. Imperial wrongs from 76 years ago, beyond. I mean, where do you draw a line? At what point do you say, yeah, wrongs were done by empire? I'm the first to admit that empire done some terrible things. We exploited India. We took its natural resources. I'm no apologist for empire, but I do say it's not fair to constantly use this as a kind of battering ram. It's actually, we're in 2023 now. So I'll just conclude with these thoughts. Congratulations, India. It's a scientific development. Indians have a right to be proud, but there is another side to India, a growing intolerance, and I don't think that British networks should shy away from raising those issues just because Indian nationals don't like to hear the truth, just because they don't like that ugly side exposed as well. India is a big country. Of course, there's going to be good and bad. But all this narrative of Indian pride and Indian supremacy, I've been seeing posts online about, for example, just false posts basically. And again, it's this Hindutva supremacy. It sort of showed this image of glorious Indus Valley civilization, and it falsely attributed that to 7,000 years ago. Actually, archaeologists say it peaked around 3,500 years ago, but regardless, about 7,000 years ago. And it showed this ridiculous image of basically cave people, and it said rest of the world, 50 AD. Now, that's an example of the distortion. It's outright distortion because, well, it is. It's just common sense. Now, to be fair, a lot of Indians themselves recognize that a lot of the stuff that's put out there in that sense is hyperbole. So that's where I'm more positive, and I recognize, not all Indians have this sort of neo-nationalist mindset, and they're more honest and not so blowhard about it. But I do think that some Indian networks, and I would point to WION News and Gravitas. I think Gravitas is a subsidiary of WION, and Palki Sharma specifically, as constantly pushing an anti-British narrative. And frankly, it pisses me off because it's 2023. It's not 1943, it's 2023. Patrick Christys, whether you agree with him or not, he's a journalist. He has a right to ask that question. If you disagree with him, fine. But this idea that one person somehow represents the whole country, I mean, I happen to think it's a valid question, but there'll be other Britons who say, no, he shouldn't have said that. So why is it okay to sort of vilify and attack 68 million British people? I think, I don't know what sort of response I'll get to this video. I'll probably get loads of nationalistic pushback, and that'll just prove my point. But I'll be keeping it up. I won't be taking this video down because I'm not coming from a point of animosity towards India as a nation state. It's more about the extreme nationalism that is currently rising there. I mean, there's pride, which is fine. If I was an Indian, I'd be proud of this achievement. But what I'm talking about is a blind nationalism, this aggressive, intolerant nationalism that is clearly rising in Modi's India. I mean, world's biggest democracy. Uh, you know, I think this is being tarnished, frankly, with the intolerance that is growing. So it's kind of coupled with, on one hand, there's big advances in progress like this lunar probe, for science, but on the other hand, it's coupled with a growth in a rise in the intolerance.